Crows screamed across a blood-red sky, wings cutting through smoke and ash. Below, Rogue lay broken in the dirt. Pain burned through his ribs as he pushed himself upright. Around him, his comrades lay scattered, bleeding, barely breathing. One still fought, sword flashing against the crawling undead. The ground quaked. The Demon King's authority stirred, and from beneath the earth, corpses clawed their way out. In seconds, an army of death surrounded them. Rogue's vision swam, but instinct guided him. His flesh fell away, leaving pale bone gleaming under the dim light. Power, he rasped toward the priest. The man hesitated, then raised a trembling hand. Holy energy flared, pouring into Rogue. Strength returned, cold, sharp, unrelenting. Rogue moved. His sword whistled through skull and spine, scattering the undead in bursts of dust and bone. Every swing burned his will brighter. But the battle only darkened. The Demon King appeared behind one companion, his aura heavy as molten iron. He struck, but the hero twisted away, sparks leaping from steel. A counter came swift, the hero's blade sliced off the demon's arm. Yet the limb regenerated instantly, flesh knitting like smoke. The Demon King's hand lashed forward, seizing the hero in its grip. The hero struggled to breathe, fear flickering through his eyes. Rogue stepped in, eyes blazing with defiance. "Then we die together," he said quietly. His sword shone black as night. Transition of the abyss. The world screamed as his attack tore through it, light and shadow colliding in a storm. When it cleared, Rogue still stood, shaking but alive. The hero sighed in relief until he saw Rogue's severed arm lying beside the Demon King's body. But the fiend still lived, laughing low. "All this pain, for nothing?" he mocked. Rogue answered with a kick to the face, but the Demon King slammed him down, crushing the ground beneath. The priest raised his staff, voice trembling with prayer. Light gathered, pouring into the hero's sword until it burned like the sun. "Now," the hero whispered, charging forward. His strike split the Demon King's chest in one blinding flash. Silence followed. The body collapsed into dust. The priest exhaled shakily. "Is it over?" he asked. The hero didn't answer. He only called him closer. As the priest knelt, he saw the impossible, Rogue's body knitting back together. Bone reformed, flesh fading into faint light. Then, a broken voice rose from the ruin. The Demon King still spoke. "So, you received the blessing," he murmured. "Good. That was how it was meant to be." The hero froze. The Demon King's head began to crumble, his body turning to ash. "My role ends here," he said, voice fading. "Your victory is complete." He looked at them one last time. "But remember, choices will bring despair. When burden crushes you, don't stop walking. Find an ending unlike mine." His voice trembled, softer now. "We lived in emptiness and folly. May you not." His head fell, rolling across the ground, and his body dissolved into nothing. The battlefield grew silent. The war was over. Thus ended the fight between the hero and the Demon King, a battle that shaped the fate of the world. Time blurred. The wizard was taken back by the headmaster to his academy. The elf returned to her homeland. The priest vanished into solitude once more. Each went their own way. The false light faded, and life continued as if none of it had happened. Peace returned. Fear became a memory. And so the years passed. 10, 50, 100. Then 150. Deep within a silent forest, a lone figure sat beneath a tree. Rogue. His body was bone, worn smooth by centuries. Mountains had fallen, plains had turned to sand, and only the stars endured. The so-called blessing had become a curse, immortality bound to solitude. He stared at the sky, empty eyes reflecting starlight. What purpose remains for one who cannot die? He wondered. A shooting star crossed the heaven, burning for a moment before fading. Rogue watched in silence. Then, the sound of small footsteps. A child stepped from the trees, eyes wide with fear and awe. Before him sat a living skeleton beneath an ancient tree. One moment of stillness, then understanding. 150 years after the fall of the Demon King, time began to move again. The night was still when Rogue noticed the small figure stepping through the trees. A child, no more than 10, stared at her with bright, curious eyes. Rogue wondered what could bring someone so young this deep into the mountains at such an hour. Before she could speak, the child rushed forward and tugged at her bony cheek. A talking skeleton. The child gasped, eyes sparkling with wonder. Rogue froze, startled by the strange excitement. The tugging continued until Rogue gently caught the child's hand. "Stop that," she said softly. "I've seen many lost children wander here, but you're the first to greet me like this." Her hollow eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "Did no one ever teach you to run when you see something that isn't human?" The child shook her head, smiling. "Mama said we shouldn't judge by look. A kind heart can wear any face." Rogue blinked, taken aback by the simple wisdom. A quiet chuckle escaped her, Getting sentimental after all this time, and then a strange child appears, she murmured. The girl tilted her head. Who are you, skeleton? And why do you carry that sword? Her gaze lingered on the black blade at Rogue's side. Rogue lifted it, the edge glinting faintly. An imperial messenger, she said. A courier trusted by the emperor himself. I travel to deliver his word. This sword protects the mountain now, cursed, but loyal. The child's eyes widened in awe. Then you must be really strong, she exclaimed. Rogue nodded, amused. Of course, one must master many things for the emperor's service, even necromancy. To prove it, she waved her hand. The ground stirred, and a small, glowing squeal rose from the soil, dancing like mist. The child clapped her hands in delight. You really are amazing, she cried. Then her tone shifted, earnest and bright. Please make me your disciple. I want to be strong too. Rogue stared, speechless. Then she laughed, dry and soft. I'm just bored, child. Training a disciple sounds troublesome. The girl pouted. But in stories, the hero always takes the student. She tapped Rogue's head with a small finger. You're stingy and heartless. Rogue sighed. I don't know about stories, she said, but I am not a master. The girl crossed her arms, sulking in silence. Morning came. Rogue rested beneath the tree, half asleep, when a loud voice broke the calm. Good morning, master, she heard. She opened her eye. The child stood there, grinning. You again? Go home, Rogue said sharply. Your parents will be worried. A skeleton like me might be mistaken for a monster. But the smile faded from the child's face. I don't have a home. It burned down. Mama and Papa are gone. Mama told me I have to be strong, alone. Rogue's words caught in her throat. The child's small hands clenched. I have to get strong, right? You understand, don't you? In that moment, something in the child's smile reflected Rogue's own forgotten self. Lonely, determined, lost. After a long silence, Rogue sighed. Fine, she said at last. I'll teach you swordsmanship. The girl's eyes lit up. Really? Rogue raised her hand in mock surrender. It's unbecoming of a strong woman to refuse a child's plea. The girl blinked. You're a woman? She asked in surprise. Rogue stiffened. Is that a problem? She muttered. The child giggled, bowing dramatically. Thank you, Miss Rogue. Then she ran off to play with the summoned squeal, laughter echoing through the trees. Rogue watched quietly, her thoughts drifting back to the empire she once served. The emperor's people suffered because I failed to deliver his final message, she thought. Maybe teaching this child to stand alone will be my atonement. She rose, drawing a wooden stick from the ground and handing it to the girl. Your first lesson begins now. The girl gripped it eagerly, mimicking Rogue's stance. Their blades of wood clacked softly beneath the old tree. When exhaustion set in, they sat side by side, catching their breath. Rogue lifted her hand, summoning small monsters of mist and earth. The girl's eyes widened again. Fight them, Rogue said gently. Learn to face what frightens you. As the child charged forward with a shout, Rogue leaned back against the tree, the faintest trace of warmth flickering in her hollow chest. For the first time in centuries, she didn't feel entirely alone. The child sometimes chases the monsters and sometimes is chased by them. Later, the two pretend to be ghosts and scare a man until he faints. They tire again and return to sleep beneath the tree with the child's hand resting on Rogue's skeletal hand and the child leaning on Rogue as she falls asleep. Rogue resumes sword training and over time, the child becomes skilled. The child smiles when she looks at Rogue, and Rogue smiles back. 11 years later, a scene shows a girl bathing in a forest lake. Rogue calls the girl and invites her to eat. The girl answers that she will help right away. While they cook, the girl tells Rogue she has something serious to discuss. Rogue asks what it is and comments that she is suddenly setting the mood. Eating together, the girl explains that the village she once lived in was abandoned after a sudden surge in monsters, that the empire abandoned it, and that hope there has faded because everyone has given up. Rogue is confused by this news. The girl admits that she has become quite strong. Rogue directly asks if she plans to become a hero. The direct question unsettles the girl. Rogue continues that having taught her for 11 years, Rogue can now see what she is thinking and recalls a friend who wanted to become a hero to help people despite ridicule and doubt, insisting that one does not need qualifications to save people. The girl is very surprised by Rogue's words. Rogue, as the sole successor of the northern-style hunting techniques and her master, presents a dagger to the girl with the hope that she will draw it only with good intentions. The girl accepts the dagger with respect. Rogue instructs her to go and save the world, then return, promising to always be there waiting. Prepared to depart, the girl says goodbye and leaves. Rogue wonders how many years it will take, 5 years, 10 years, and resolves to protect the place until the child returns, confident that the child will save the world and come back. After the girl leaves, Rogue feels sad and reflects that the connection had been brief past encounter, and that waiting again does not feel as frightening as before. Rogue is interrupted by someone asking if she got lost as well. Distracted, Rogue replies that she is not a master without looking up. Rogue then turns and sees the girl approaching, now badly wounded, but greeting Rogue cheerfully. Rogue is shocked to see the girl. The girl asks if it has been a while. The girl's one leg is missing, yet she laughs loudly. The girl tells Rogue that the journey had been wonderful, that the empire was vast beyond imagination, and that she encountered countless new places and things. She admits there were many monsters and she helped people with the skills Rogue taught her. People began to call her a hero, but the emperor viewed her as a thorn and ordered her assassination, declaring her an obstacle to imperial power. Rogue suddenly hugs the girl, surprising her. The girl apologizes, saying she feels dizzy, then clings tightly to Rogue while asking if Rogue has been well and if Rogue cried when she was gone. Rogue does not directly answer and instead says that now Rogue wants to hear the girl's story. The girl briefly recounts the untold parts of her journey. At that moment, soldiers arrive and one of them angrily curses the hero brat, saying she should have died peacefully instead of coming to the mountain. Their leader, a knight, orders silence and says they are searching, prompting the angry soldier to apologize. As they advance on the mountain, they spot a figure and the knight commands the soldiers to pack quickly and descend the mountain. Rogue appears, furious, holding a gleaming sword and asks if they still think this is a mountain. Rogue summons many monsters that attack the soldiers. Rogue explains that 120 years ago while traveling the continent as a messenger, she found remnants of the Demon King's army here, tore them apart, and scattered their pieces until the corpses became soil and a forest grew. Rogue says she feared necromancers would misuse the place and has guarded it ever since. But now it seems that guarding is no longer necessary. The summoned monsters brutally kill the soldiers, causing the others to panic. The knight urges everyone to calm down and form up, insisting that a single necromancer can only control a limited number of undead, and that waiting might resolve the situation. Before he can finish, many corpses rise and faces appear, startling the knight. The knight questions the necromancy that can create an army of undead and asks who Rogue is. A monster suddenly severs the knight's head from his neck. Rogue declares herself the mouth of the emperor and the voice of the empire, calling on the people of the empire to heed the messenger's word. Rogue slashes the ground with her sword, ripping the mountain earth open. A child in a nearby village looks toward the mountain, bewildered by the unfolding event. Rogue warns that if the empire strays from the will of its founder, then the nobles and loyal subjects have the right to set it back on course. And she tells her old homeland to pay the price for its crimes. Rogue's fury poured down the mountain and did not stop at the tree line. The demons she called tore after the soldiers like a black tide and chased them into the village. The troops, breathing hard and wide-eyed, thought roofs and fences would save them. They were wrong. The undead flowed through alleys and into houses, slipping through doors and windows, and slaughter spread through the street. Men who had trained together were cut down where they stood. The village became screams and splinters. A soldier shouted that undead had been sighted at the southern outskirts and called for all standby units to assemble. Men scrambled to form lines. Some tried traps or shields to absorb the monsters, but every attempt invited more horror. Explosions flared as defensive charges detonated, and larger waves answered with teeth and claw. Panic spread fast. Discipline frayed. Men were swallowed before orders traveled. Then a calm voice cut through. A man stepped forward, ordering people aside with the authority of someone used to command. His blade moved like a single, clean storm. He cleaved a monster in half, then spun with blinding speed to cut down several more in one sweep. He moved with sharp precision that made the field fall silent. When the last foe fell, he demanded to know what necromancer could marshal such a tide of corpses. They named him Imperial Knight Escher Soma. The title landed heavy, one of the Empire's best. His eyes fixed on a giant monster where Rogue stood, and the truth hit him. The necromancer was on that beast. He felt sour surprise. A mage should hide behind undead, not ride them. Escher drew his sword with a bitter thought and launched an attack at the giant's leg. The strike thundered into bone and earth. Rogue felt the impact on her own limb. A mark seared across her leg where the blow landed. Heat and shock ran through her bone. She recognized the impossible spear thrust that had scarred the child. The wound matched the mark on her disciple. Realization struck. It had been Escher who had done it. Rage flared. She demanded if he was the one and her anger swelled until it aimed at the village itself. Escher moved to block her. Their swords met, metal rang and sparks flew. He forced his edge down and countered with a strike that tested her balance. Rogue answered with a sudden assault that cut his leg and gave her a momentary edge. She rained blows until he staggered. Escher fought back, forcing her to retreat with a clean blow. He cursed, saying no one had pushed him so far since the battle with the 4 knights, and demanded to know what she truly was. Rogue's reply came like a blade, and revenant. Wounded and angry, Escher tried to stall, mocking vengeance as superstition. He had slain so many, he said, that whose revenge she sought meant nothing. Rogue remained cold. She spoke of necromancy's cost, how stamina bled away the farther and the more undead she raised. Then, with a motion like a verdict, she placed her hand on his face and tightened her grip until bone protested. Blood trickled from his lips as she condemned his pride and she named the losses carved into the Empire's name. Escher slashed to break free. Rogue evaded and kicked him against the stone. He laughed bitterly and called her a whining monster, claiming the Empire's deaths had been necessary. Rogue's voice turned cold. If those deaths were necessary, she said, then his death by her hand would be equally necessary. He smirked that not even today would be his end. A blue light descended behind him and struck several points in the village. New figures appeared, locking Rogue's summoned monsters within shimmering prison. Commands rang out: install mana relay, confirm circuit stabilization, connect 155 mana battery. The anti-undead barrier came online, a lattice of magic and devices that trapped and erased the undead. The soldiers cheered as the monsters vanished. Escher grinned and told Rogue her army had been destroyed. He boasted that the barrier was the work of the legendary wizard of the Heroes Party, praised 120 years ago. Even someone like Rogue, he said, would not last long inside such a field. Rogue answered calmly that she already knew. She remembered the Maker, an artisan wizard, stubborn and foolish in a way she respected. She dismissed the loss of this army. She could raise another. Those who would truly stand with her, she said, were not corpses but the Empire's exploited people. She vowed they would join her vengeance and their anger would be the blade to bring the Empire down. Rogue's mind wandered back to the days of her hero team, when they had hated war but were forced to seize what others cherished in order to protect their own. Death had been a certainty, an ever-present companion. Though she had thought those days long gone, reality proved otherwise. She questioned whether so many lives had vanished for the future she now faced. The answer eluded her, leaving only uncertainty. In her skeletal form, she observed the memories of her companions from a distance, recalling the faces, the laughter, the battles. She asked herself why she had ever stepped onto the battlefield, for whom she had fought, and where she was meant to go in an era stripped of those she loved. Finding no answers, she kept moving forward, each step a hollow echo of the past. For days after the hero extermination incident, the scene shifted to the northern adventurers' village. Rogue entered a small, dimly lit restaurant, holding out a map and asking for direction. She explained she had lost her way traveling north along the mountains. A customer dismissed her brusquely, reminding her this was not a guide office, but the Adventurers Guild. Rogue insisted it was the only place open, that all she sought was direction. As she prepared to leave quietly, another man interrupted angrily, calling her bold for barging in. The first customer raised his hand, silencing him, and remarked on Rogue's aura, noting the blood upon her, the silent weight of past deeds. He whispered a grim rumor: a necromancer had killed knights and ravaged Spear Tower village across the mountain. Hidden nearby, a masked man listened intently, absorbing every word. The customer's gaze shifted to speculation about the undead. Without warning, he hurled a knife at Rogue. She caught it effortlessly, her eyes cold and sharp. Fury tinged her voice as she warned him to choose his fights wisely, then slammed her fist into the floor with terrifying force. Beneath the cracked boards, the masked man was revealed, stabbed through the chest with the same knife. The customer, unshaken, commanded his men to kill her. 2 attackers rushed forward. Rogue, her patience thin, reminded them that she had only asked for direction, and any consequences would be their own fault. One attacker lunged with a sword. She dodged, struck, and punched him into the ground. The second slashed. She caught his blade, grabbed his collar, and flipped him violently. As the 2 men fell, Rogue turned toward the seated customer. 2 more attackers charged. She leapt between them, forcing their knives together until they froze, stunned. Then, with a brutal slam, she drove both their heads into the ground with her bare hand. With the room cleared, she vanished from sight. The customer sensed her presence, drew his sword, and struck. She dodged effortlessly, springing onto a table. Furious, he cut through the wood and pressed forward, calculating his next strike. Rogue ducked, grabbed his hand, and hurled him backward with such force he crashed through the floor. The remaining attackers stared in disbelief, shocked that their leader had fallen in a single, precise blow. Rogue's voice rang out, who comes next? Fear rippled through the room until a commanding voice intervened. A man approached, instructing Rogue to end it there and promising to grant her what she sought. The others whispered in awe, recognizing him as the guildmaster. He introduced himself, Tor Vinland, head of the Empire's northernmost adventurers guild, and invited Rogue to speak elsewhere. In his office, he explained the story of a skeleton said to haunt the mountains behind Spear Tower Village, a tale every adventurer knew. Many had requested investigations, and countless search parties had ventured forth, yet none returned with proof. Tor admitted he had dismissed it as mere rumor, until now. Rogue slammed her fist onto his table, shattering it, demanding he not waste her time and asking what he truly wanted. Tor lit a cigarette and spoke of the guild's neglect by the Empire, how villagers abandoned their homes, and how reckless adventurers perished protecting land in vain. Those who remained trembled daily, awaiting death. Rogue mocked him, asking why they had not resisted the Empire, saying that if no one acted, nothing would change. Tor countered that they had not done nothing, they had done what they could. Law and order in the abandoned lands had fallen to those who stayed. Adventurers had gathered to defend homes, pouring all they had into feudal defense. Other guilds had done the same, yet nothing improved. Rogue pressed further. Had they never considered forming alliances to fight the Empire? Tor admitted that such a thing would not be simple. It would mean war, and countless deaths. Instead, they had waited for salvation. That hope had come once, in the form of a hero who lifted them from despair, but it had failed. Only now did Tor realize what they truly lacked. Hatred. It does not matter if homes are destroyed, or if tomorrow never comes, he declared. If we can kill the Empire, dying becomes worthwhile. That is war. He asked Rogue for her aid, promising to assign 2 adventurers immediately and later gather all guild resources to support Avenger or Demon, it does not matter. We will join your war. Rogue, unsettled, apologized for destroying the guild and admitted her fault in abandoning the Empire until the village had fallen into ruin. She revealed it had been 150 years since she last accepted a request. On the table, she placed an item, her Ruby-class adventurer tag, a rank extinct since the Great War. Tor stared, realizing her true standing. Rogue dismissed it lightly, calling herself a wraith of a filthy past. She accepted his request and declared her first destination, the northern mountain range, the continent's most dreadful range, where snow never ceased to fall. High in the mountain, Rogue moved with 2 men sent from the guild. Snow hissed sideways and the air bit at exposed skin. She asked how long it had been since they left the village. One man peered through a magnifying glass and answered, 5th day of discreet movement along the range. Rogue noted that sounded swift for a secret march. He explained they could not risk running into Imperial patrols. Rogue agreed, eyes scanning white ridges and narrow paths. Ahead a ragged group moved along the trail. Rogue pointed and asked who they were and how they had gotten there first. The man said they were not a search party but survivors from Spear Tower Village, some trailed by looters trying to return to the capital. Another added that by their lack of winter gear they had likely been cut off while moving the range. Rogue turned to a crouched man nearby and asked what lay along the lower path. He introduced himself as Muron Same and his companion as Sword Harrier, insisting she remember their names. He said the lower road passed small households likely raided for supply. Harrier added that plundering had become common for imperial knights since the current emperor seized the throne. Rogue's gaze hardened. Then I must end them, she said, voice sharp as a blade. Her companion stiffened. Before they could react she vanished. She dropped fast, a shadow falling between trees, and struck the looters with sudden violence. Confusion scattered them. One shouted about a commotion. Another cried, an ambush? Rogue's cold voice answered, yes. From above, one companion called down, are you desperate to die? Muron replied flatly, the man is already dead. Below, soldiers scrambled to warn their chief of the intruder. Rogue fought in the jam of men and carts, surrounded on all sides. A female soldier barked orders to block retreat and encircle the attack. Before she finished, Rogue was already behind her, the blade flashed and the woman's head fell. Rogue mocked her command, repeating her words with venom as she held the head up on her sword, staring into its empty eye. Decoration, she spat, and drove the point home with a sneer. Then she called the monster. The monstrous army she summoned spilled from the earth, bodies reshaped into teeth and root, into fists of rotten bone. They overwhelmed the soldiers. From the height, Muron and Harrier realized the power Rogue had shown at the guild had been only a fraction of what she could do. The monsters crushed shields and ripped men apart while Rogue moved through the chaos, cutting heads with the slow, terrible precision of someone emptied by grief. She whispered the name of the village as she slaughtered, the Wraith of Spear Tower Village. As the battle tipped, Muron told his companion it was time to go down. Rogue sat astride a monstrous steed of bone and bramble, the dead piled like winter harvest around her. A soldier lunged from behind, Rogue sidestepped, kicked, and smashed his mask. As he fell, a pendant slid free and clinked on stone. Rogue's eyes snagged on the little charm. Memory flooded her. Long ago a man had given her the same pendant as apology for doubting her. He had explained it was a charm made by his daughter, a wish for an adventurer's safe return. She had accepted it, promising to thank the girl. Later he had told her his daughter was killed by the Imperial Army 2 years earlier. Rogue had offered a clumsy apology for words spoken without care. He had told her not to apologize. Everyone carried wounds here. They cursed the Empire and burned their remaining lives for revenge. He warned her not to ruin her life with the same hatred, reminding her that someone waited for everyone in the world. Rogue stared at the pendant, and in the quiet of that memory she whispered to Skull, not to go too far. Near them a monstrous arm struck a soldier through the ribs. He fell and gasped, "Sorry, Michelle," to someone he loved before his breath left him. Rogue watched, then avenged him by cleaving the creature. Muron and Harrier joined the field, praising her and promising to handle cleanup so she could rest. They said corpses would be needed to raise undead, but Rogue did not answer. Instead, she stood while they began burning bodies. Muron remarked she was strange to prefer cremation over necromancy. Harrier added that sorrow shaded her face, though he could not say for whom. Rogue said nothing, watching the flames swallow flesh and cloth. From inside her a darker voice rose, her own shadow, a thing that mocked her with cruel, precise words. It told her that despair had only begun, that each choice would pull her deeper, that fate could not be outrun. Rogue tried to silence that inner voice and ordered the dead to remain in the underworld. The voice only laughed and taunted, louder and more intimate than before. She listened until her silence became a kind of answer. She could not banish. The fire crackled and the mountain wind carried ash like snow. The story then leapt to a burning mansion below, where a woman stood on a balcony and sang while watching flames lick the courtyard. Lady Fry. She delighted in the people's screams, noting the strength of their lungs and the sweet smell of smoke. A knight approached, suggesting the men could play with the princess's head, but Lady Fry waved it away. She was too heartbroken for such petty sport. She had expected a larger prize. The battle had been too tidy. She wondered aloud if anyone in the Empire was crazy enough to resist her. The knight shrugged until a soldier arrived with a sealed decree. He announced that a massive undead army appeared at the northern wall, led by a necromancer acting under imperial command. Lady Frey's orders were to subjugate the threat. She laughed, calling the necromancer mad, and her eyes brightened at the promise of a new game. "Now play," she said, voice soft and wicked, and ordered her troops to assemble. The banners snapped in smoke-streaked wind. Soldiers rushed to form ranks, and the mansion's fire fed the sky. In the northern mountains, Rogue stood among the stench of battle and the memory of a pendant. The next war had been called, and both vengeance and play rode the same thin path toward the continent's frozen crown. Rogue, Muron, and Harrier pressed onward through the icy northern mountains, their breaths visible in the cold air. For 2 weeks, silence had hung over them like a shroud. Muron, clearly restless, broke the quiet. "This silence, it's unnatural." Rogue moves like a corpse, saying nothing. "Something's wrong." He glanced at Harrier, unease in his voice. "And her head, floating? Am I imagining things?" Harrier's thoughts drifted back to the guild leaders' meeting. The undead rising in Spear Tower Village, they had explained, was tied to the hero who had recently died. That village had been the hero's childhood home, the place where she had fled from the Empire's night. The timing of the undead army coincided with her disappearance, and Rogue's fighting style mirrored the hero's precisely. It was clear now, the child had died from injuries long ago. The guild leader had spoken cautiously of Rogue. He was not evil, merely struggling like everyone else, trapped in grief and circumstance. Rogue was moving toward the northern mountain range. He might not be their enemy, but he could not be counted as an ally either. Yet he was key to challenging the Empire. Because Muron and Harrier were familiar with the North, the leader had tasked them with guiding him. Harrier had voiced concern about Rogue's unpredictability. Could he truly follow their guidance? The leader had only reassured him that intuition would suffice, handing him a detailed map. Back in the present, Harrier nudged Rogue toward another path. Rogue noticed Spear Tower Village below and suggested stopping. As he entered, memories surged. He recalled the child crafting a paper bag with 2 holes and making him wear it. She had dragged him into a bar despite his reluctance, requesting a 2-seater table, which the shopkeeper provided. They had passed the time playing shooting games, Rogue's aim flawless, the child laughing with delight. Then came the singing. Rogue had joined her, startling her at first, and the bar had erupted in laughter. Dancing followed, beer in hand, and for the first time in years, Rogue had felt true happiness. That memory lingered as he walked into the same bar now. The shooting board hung in place, the interior unchanged, yet the room was empty. Sadness pressed on him until a glass of beer appeared before him. He looked up to see the shopkeeper. "You're late," she said softly. "The bar closed long ago. Perhaps you're chasing old memories." She noticed his lack of the usual bread pouch disguise. Rogue asked how she recognized him. Sipping from a wine bottle, she explained the child had spoken of, though never revealing he was an undead who could speak. The child had worked there to cover living expenses. The shopkeeper poured him Dione, a cheap wine meaning new, entrusted to her by the child. It had been intended to share with Rogue before setting off on a journey, a tradition among adventurers for safety and new beginnings. But now, the village was empty, and the wine had not been sold in years. Harrier wandered through the silent village, noting the desolation. The shopkeeper spoke again, voice heavy with sorrow. The country was ruined. She understood why Rogue had risen. Yet she questioned if his actions truly reflected the child's wish. Rogue said nothing. She answered for him, no. The child would have wished for brightness, not destruction. Carefully, she handed Rogue the child's belonging, the dress worn when she set out to become a hero, her pendant, and the sword he had given her. He stared, stunned. The shopkeeper explained these were entrusted to him, to guide him onward. They symbolized the child's heart, her dreams, her desire for adventure, for gathering comrades, saving people, and defeating evil. Like the ruby-class adventurers of old fairy tale. Rogue held the glass of Dione, whispering, adventure. Memories and lessons collided within him. Hatred blinds even the wise. Rage can distort judgment. Could he avoid repeating mistakes? He realized that though others called him her master, he had learned only from her. Now, he resolved to carry her heart upon his shoulders. Finishing the glass, he thanked the shopkeeper, who smiled knowing. She asked where he was headed. With the child's belongings in hand, Rogue replied that having drunk the wine of new beginnings, he must depart, not for revenge, but for the adventure she had dreamed of. The mountains awaited, silent and treacherous, yet he stepped forward with renewed resolve. In his mind, he pictured the child beside him, their smiles mirrored from years past. Every step he took carried her memory, her hope, her joy. Rogue was no longer merely the skeleton wandering for vengeance. He was the herald of a story yet to be written, the embodiment of her dream, walking into the unknown to forge a new adventure. Thus, with the child's memory in his heart, the skeleton herald began his journey anew, the echo of laughter and courage guiding him as he set out to carve his tale into the world. Behind her, Harrier exchanged a glance with Muron. "She's out," Harrier murmured. Muron nodded, calling after her to ask if her business inside was done. Rogue didn't answer immediately. She looked ahead at the snow-covered road, then smirked when Muron said they would take the normal route north. "It's a cold path," he warned, "but since you're bones, I guess that won't matter." Rogue laughed at his teasing, sharp, hollow, but strangely alive. "Still so incompetent, you juniors," she mocked. Her tone carried a shift that made Muron pause. The air around her felt different, heavier, darker. Harrier sensed it too and frowned. The guild master had once warned him about Rogue's aura. Now he understood why. She began walking again, each step echoing softly in the snow. Harrier caught up, trying to fill the silence with talk of adventurers and their ranks. "There are 10 levels," he explained, his voice steady but careful. "Diamond is the highest, Earth the lowest. They're grouped into superhuman, upper, middle, and lower classes. Adventurers can't take quests above their rank. The higher you go, the pricier the commissions get." Rogue listened without turning her head. "Most people stop at the 7th rank," Harrier continued, cutting down a wandering goblin in one motion. "Anyone beyond that is called a superhuman. The 8th rank and above explore uncharted land, fight at the front lines, or serve as imperial generals." Another monster lunged from the forest, a hulking beast with frost in its fur, and Harrier sliced it clean through. "Middle tier," he muttered. He spoke as if lecturing himself, but Rogue's silence pressed on him. "You're listening, right?" "I am," Rogue replied at last, her tone calm but distant. "What ranks are you two?" Muron grinned. "Both Topaz, 5th tier." Rogue's eyes gleamed faintly. "Topaz? Impressive. Though in my time, the system was different." Her gaze drifted to the sky. "I was a ruby once, if that rank still means any." The word made Harrier's brow crease. Ruby, he'd heard of it somewhere. Muron chuckled. "Ruby? That's from fairy tale. Didn't think you'd joke like that." "Maybe I'm not joking," Rogue said quietly. Muron laughed it off, but she shivered, remembering the undead army she'd once commanded. Even as a joke, Muron admitted, I was terrified seeing your army. That earned a faint smile from Rogue. Without warning, she drew her sword. The ground trembled. From the mist, an enormous undead beast rose, towering, eyes burning like dying stars. Muron stumbled back, shock freezing her breath. Harrier turned pale. Put it away, he shouted. Rogue only tilted her head, amused. See? I can summon monsters too. Harrier's panic grew desperate. Please, he cried. Rogue sighed and flicked her wrist. The creature let out a low moan and dissolved back into the earth. The air grew still again. Muron's excitement, however, hadn't faded. She laughed nervously, half thrilled, half scared. Rogue's grin softened. For a northerner, Harrier, you've got the guts of a flea, she teased. But inside, something stirred, a warmth she hadn't felt in a century. These two reminded her of the companions she had once traveled with. The laughter, the fear, the clumsy courage, it was all the same. A strange nostalgia brushed her hollow heart. As they walked deeper into the frostbitten woods, Muron finally asked what Harrier had been wondering all along. Why go to the northern mountain? Her voice was careful but curious. That place is crawling with monsters and things that act too much like humans. Rogue stopped. Snow fell silently around her. Because I have promises to keep, she said. Things to find. Debts to settle. Her tone was steady, but the shadows in her voice hinted at old scars. 120 years ago, I tried to storm the Demon King's army hall. My undead army was ready, but a bearded man destroyed it all with one barrier. Muron blinked. Single barrier? It wasn't ordinary, Rogue explained. It was the work of a hero's wizard, crafted to repel undead waves from the Demon King's domain. I was useless alone. To change anything, I'll need a human army. Harrier's breath caught as understanding dawned. You're that Rogue, he whispered. The name hung in the air like a curse. She didn't deny it. I'll make the northern tribes my allies, she said. Her tone carried no pride, only resolve. Harrier almost shouted. Those beasts? You can't. Muron interrupted softly. If she can, they'd be the strongest force on the continent. Rogue nodded once. My goal was once the Emperor's head. My disciples stopped me. Now, I'll rebuild the Empire instead of burning it. Her gaze shifted to them. You too, though, you failed the Great Hunt, didn't you? The word struck like a blade. Harrier's jaw tightened, Muron's eyes widened. Rogue smirked. Don't worry, I'll cut you some slack. The road ahead is long. Harrier sighed. Let's just move on. Enough of your games. Rogue's grin sharpened. Games? Oh, you shouldn't have said that. Snow swirled around her as she raised her hand. Let's play, then. The ground split open once more. An enormous undead beast, bigger than before, rose beneath her, and Rogue climbed onto its back with eerie grace. You have 10 seconds, she declared. Her laughter rang cold through the tree. Harrier's heart nearly stopped. Wait, we didn't do anything, he shouted, turning to Muron, but she was already sprinting away. Muron. She glanced back, shouting, live long enough to meet again. Traitor. Harrier yelled, but Rogue had already begun the countdown. 10, 9. Harrier stumbled, then ran for his life. Time's up, Rogue said soft. The monster roared and lunged, shaking the forest as it chased him. Rogue's laughter echoed above the howling wind, wild and alive for the first time in decades. She thought of her past, the hero, the child, all those who had vanished. Their memories still burned quietly within her. Watching Harrier trip over roots and scream, she smiled to herself. You're the second batch of clueless disciples I never asked for, she murmured. Be grateful. I'm training you so you don't end up cursed like me. Muron and Harrier's cries faded into the storm. But behind Rogue's cold amusement was a quiet promise to protect them this time. She would not lose her way again. If keeping them alive meant facing the world's hatred, so be it. This time, she would remain herself. No more loneliness. No more waiting for redemption that never came. The chaos that followed tore through the mountains. Explosions of magic and bone sent fog rolling across the forest. The earth quaked under the undead steps. From miles away, the storm looked like the birth of a new calamity. And in the distance, a figure watched. Lady Fry stood with her soldiers at the edge of a frozen ridge, her eyes locked on the swirling mist below. The faintest smile touched her lip. Found you, she whispered. The forest froze in tension. Rogue's undead creation had turned on its own, its monstrous body lunging after Muron and Harrier. The ground split under its charge, claws carving through the snow as the two adventurers bolted in terror. A swing of the creature's massive arms smashed into the earth beside Harrier, the shockwave throwing him off balance. Panic surged through him, one wrong move and he'd be dead. "Stop, you'll kill us," he cried, though his voice barely carried over the creature's guttural roar. Rogue only watched from a distance, eyes glowing faintly. Harrier ran, desperate and furious, pleading for the madness to end. Then, from beyond the tree line, a blur of motion cut through the fog. Someone was running straight toward the undead. The newcomer moved like a comet, graceful, reckless, and burning with energy. She leapt into the air, landing atop the beast's skull with perfect balance. Even the monster hesitated. Rogue's gaze sharpened as the woman turned toward her, eyes lit with fierce excitement. "Impossible," Rogue muttered. The woman smiled, drew her blade, and dove toward her. Steel clashed against steel. Sparks exploded. Rogue barely caught the strike, her arm shaking from the impact. The stranger's smile widened. "A good reaction," she said softly. Then she vanished from sight. A heartbeat later, her sword came from above, a spiral of light cutting through the mist. The force shattered Rogue's summoning sigil and dispersed the undead in a burst of black flame. Muron gasped. Harrier stumbled back, frozen in disbelief. Rogue hit the ground hard but rolled to her feet, steadying herself. The woman landed lightly before her, brushing frost from her armor. "An ambush, and from someone I don't even know," she said coldly. "How rude." Rogue raised her sword. "Name yourself." The woman's grin turned razor-sharp. "Fry," she said, "one of the Empire's 4 knights. Fry of war. I've come to wage war on you, Rogue." The word struck like lightning. Rogue remembered the stories. The 4 knights of the Empire, champions forged under the bearded man's command. So the rumors were true. Fry lifted her blade again, her eyes glimmering with thrill. "Now that introductions are over," she said, "let's begin." Their clash split the clearing apart. Trees shattered as their blades collided, shockwaves rippling through the snow. Frey's movements blurred, her strikes spiraled like dancing ribbons of light, each blow heavier than the last. Rogue blocked, parried, absorbed. The final kick sent her skidding across the frozen ground, boots carving deep lines into the ice. She caught herself by driving her sword into the soil, sparks scattering around. Frey's stance was loose, almost lazy, but every movement carried lethal grace. Her joints twisted at inhuman angles, her reach unnaturally long. Rogue's mind raced. She's not human. She moves like something built for war. When Fry lunged again, Rogue flicked a small stone at her eye. Frey's head jerked instinctively. That instant of hesitation was all Rogue needed. She closed the distance, her fists hammering into Frey's face and ribs in a flurry of bone-cracking strike. Fry staggered back, gritting her teeth, then countered with a wide arc of her sword. The blow tore through the ground and sent Rogue tumbling through a veil of dust. Pressing a hand to her bleeding cheek, Fry sneered. 2 children and a skeleton. That's your grand army? I'll bury them all beside you. Rogue rose slowly, laughter in her voice. You might be able to kill me, she admitted, but your eyes are weak. And that, she said, raising her weapon, will be your death. Her sword, the Demon King's blade, gleamed with dark red light. The air thickened as black mist poured out, taking shape around. Dozens of undead rose from the soil, forming a wall of death between Rogue and Fry. Frey's expression finally faltered. "So this is your force," she murmured. "Run!" Rogue shouted to Muron and Harrier. "Take the sword and go." A deafening explosion ripped through the air before either of them could move. Smoke engulfed the battlefield, and through it emerged a colossal dragon-like undead beast. Harrier and Muron perched on its back, both yelling in panic. "What did you put in that smoke?" Harrier shouted down. Rogue didn't even flinch. "Chilies," she replied. "Soaked in blasting smoke, mixed with powdered turtle shell, hardened with clay. I can write the recipe if you want." "Not now," Harrier snapped. Muron shouted over the roar, "If that woman's one of the 4 knights, even this monster won't hold her back." "What's the plan?" Rogue's eyes flickered. "Retreat beyond the boundary markers. Make noise. Lots of it. We'll lose her in the chaos." Muron looked doubtful but nodded. "What if the other knights are already near?" Before Rogue could answer, the ground trembled. Fry emerged from the smoke, armor scorched but eyes blazing. "So you do want war," she said, raising her blade. "Then let's make it official." Rogue gripped her sword tighter and advanced. Her stance shifted, the northern style. Fry recognized it instantly and spun into her spiral form. When their blades met, the world cracked. Energy exploded outward, erasing the undead in one blinding flash. As the dust cleared, Frey's laughter cut through the silence. "Magnificent," she said. "Undead giants, smoke bombs, and a skeleton with sword techniques that shouldn't exist. You're making this fight fun." Rogue brushed dust off her tattered cloak. "You've dirted a lady's clothes," she said coldly. "How vile." Fry smirked. "A lady? You lack the eyes for mirror." Rogue's tone sharpened. "You're the coward who ran and got caught. Better that, Fry said, then a pathetic little freak in tight. Rogue froze, anger rising. Careful, Knight. Oh, the undead bastard can still get angry, Fry teased. How quaint. Their gazes locked, fire and frost colliding. Frey's voice softened into mock pity. Call your army again. I'd like to see if it's truly as impressive as you think. Or maybe it's those two brats holding you back. She stepped closer, lowering her sword. Tell me, would it help if I killed them first? Rogue didn't move. Her voice dropped, calm and cold. You talk too much. Then die quiet, Fry whispered, lunging forward. But before her blade could reach, an arrow struck her shoulder. Then another, two more, piercing through her hands. Fry staggered, teeth bared in pain. From the ridge above, shadows emerged, dozens of figures raining arrows like silver rain. The guild's reinforcements had arrived. Rogue straightened, laughter echoing across the battlefield. Overconfident, she said. You thought you were the only hunter here. Fry ripped the arrows from her hands, furious. But Rogue stepped forward, her voice carrying through the storm. Do you even know what your name means, Fry of War? She asked. Bow your head before the mother mountain of the north, the mountain your empire fears but can never conquer. Fry let out a short, mocking laugh as realization struck her. So that was why Rogue had gone all the way to the northern village yard. With a smirk, she snapped the arrows in half and signaled several soldiers to follow. Her voice dripped with amusement as she admitted it was all just to flaunt one of his foolish tricks. She told him to make it entertaining. She would wait as long as it took for the most exciting war of all. Her grin turned sharp, eyes glinting with something almost unhinged. I'm counting on you, Mr. Skull, she said before turning away. Rogue stared back, silent and stunned, wondering if she had finally gone mad. Harrier's relieved voice broke through, shouting that Mr. Skull was safe. Rogue shot back irritably, asking if that's what they really thought she was. Muron's attention shifted toward a massive tree nearby. What about the people trapped up there? He asked. Rogue blinked, then waved casually, greeting them as if nothing was wrong. Thanks for the help earlier, she called, cheerful as ever. The response came quick and sharp. A villager's arrow sliced through the air and buried itself in Rogue's palm. The man laughed, mocking the sight of a talking skeleton. Maybe I'll use your head as a cup, he joked. Rogue froze, instantly recognizing those same troublesome villagers. Harrier's quiet laugh confirmed it, and Muron sighed in resignation. Without hesitation, Rogue shouted, "Run!" They bolted through the forest as spears and arrows chased them. The villagers' cries echoed behind. Intruders! Catch them! Harrier, panting, yelled at Rogue, asking why their supposed allies were attacking. Muron reminded her that Rogue claimed to have made a deal with these people. I did, Rogue snapped, 100 years ago. Muron groaned, realizing the absurdity of it all. They had come this far for nothing. Rogue muttered that maybe mentioning their names would help, but Muron shook his head. It's too late, they see us as intruders now. Trying to calm things, Rogue turned to face the villager. Wait, he called, raising his hand. I'm Edward Benira, from the northern village. I want to speak with your leader. The villagers exchanged uncertain glances. A skeleton from our village? Do you expect us to believe that? One asked. Rogue, thinking he had cleared up the misunderstanding, reassured Harrier and Muron. See, everything's fine. But moments later, iron bars slammed shut behind them. The three stood inside a cramped cell, the air thick with embarrassment. Harrier crossed her arms and glared at Rogue. Nice job talking, Mr. Diplomat, she muttered sarcastically. Rogue sighed and tapped her lightly on the head, knocking her out cold. Muron watched in disbelief. You really were part of the northern village? He asked. Rogue nodded quietly. A long time ago. Harrier groaned awake soon after, rubbing her head. This is worse than it looks, she warned. When they dragged me here, I saw the village name, Red Lamp. They're a branch of the northern tribe. Rogue tilted his skull slightly. So? Muron frowned. Our mission was only to escort you to the mountain's entrance, not contact the village directly. We're deep in enemy ground now. Before Rogue could reply, a loud clang echoed as a guard struck the bars. The chief summons the undead, the man barked. Rogue straightened, and the guard led him through winding stone corridors to the chief's hall. The chief sat upon a throne of dark bone and iron, his eyes burning with anger. You dare pretend to be one of us? He growled. His gaze swept toward Harrier and Muron, calling them shameless for returning. Harrier tried to explain, trembling, but her words fell flat. Rogue stepped forward. You misunderstand, he said evenly. I truly am one of you. Free us, and we can talk. The chief slammed his axe against the ground, his fury rising. You mock our blood, he roared. You and your kind are liars, outsiders. You are no northern villager. His voice filled the chamber like thunder. Rogue's tone hardened. After I failed the great hunt, I stopped being treated like a person here. Seems nothing has changed. His cuffs shattered with a sudden crack, metal fragments scattering across the floor. The guards moved to react, but the chief raised a hand, halting them. He's mine, he said coldly. Rising from his throne, he gripped his axe and advanced. The weapon whistled through the air, but Rogue slipped aside with ease, his movements quick and precise. In one smooth motion, he broke Muron's cuffs too. Move back, he muttered. The chief struck again and again, each swing heavy enough to break stone, but Rogue kept dodging, his motions fluid and detached. Muron watched in awe. Rogue moved like someone who had trained for centuries, every step measured, every motion deliberate. The chief sneered between swings. Is this all you've got, skeleton? Rogue's eyes glowed faintly blue. Not quite, he murmured. The chief scoffed. That light in your skull, is that all that remains of your soul? He lunged forward and drove a punch into Rogue's head. The impact echoed through the hall. The dead shouldn't walk among the living, he spat. Then the air changed. A heavy pressure filled the chamber, pressing down like a storm. The chief's knees buckled as Rogue's voice cut through the silence. The dead must return to dust, he said calmly, and the living should remember and move forward. The chief strained to stand, but the force pinned him down. Rogue tilted his head slightly. Then why is the living one kneeling, he asked softly, while the dead still stand? He looked down at him, his glowing eyes steady. It's been a long time, lamb. Let's talk. The chief froze at the name. Memories flickered, training in his youth, his master's calm voice, and the figure who once stood above him. He realized, with quiet shock, that Rogue had surpassed him long ago. Slowly, he lowered his weapon. You've grown strong, he admitted. What do you want, Rogue? The skeleton's gaze burned brighter. Gather every chief in the northern region, he ordered. We're attacking the Empire. A stunned silence followed before the chief burst into laughter. You still dream big, even as a pile of bones, he said. Yet beneath the laughter was respect. Fine, I'll summon them, but I don't trust you. Until the council gathers, you'll wait at Harrier's mansion. Rogue blinked. Mansion? The chief raised an eyebrow. Don't tell me you didn't know. Harrier, Swordhawker Harrier, is the next chief of the White Lion Tail tribe, sister tribe of the northern village. The cold mist of the northern mountains hung low over the Red Lamb territory, swallowing the ancient trees and rocky slopes in a silver haze. At the mountain's heart stood the Hawker Mansion, a towering relic of polished stone and carved timber, its walls glimmering faintly through the fog. Harrier stood before it, motionless for a long moment, his breath forming white clouds in the air. Then, without a word, he walked toward the grand doors. Behind him, Rogue watched with his usual dry tone, remarking that seeing a sweaty adventurer act so refined was almost disturbing. Harrier didn't answer. His voice, when it came, was quiet but firm. He had abandoned the name Hawker long ago, the day he fled these mountains. The mansion was just a grave of memories now. He turned away, saying he would rest in his room and to call him only if needed. Rogue watched him go, noting how much colder his aura felt, as if Harrier had become someone entirely different. Muron's faint smile confirmed the thought. He's not the same man we knew on the road, she whispered. Moments later, the mansion's heavy doors creaked open, revealing an elderly man with kind eyes and a posture still straight despite his age. Welcome home, he said warmly. I am Vanson, caretaker of the Hawker Mansion. His voice carried both formality and affection. Rogue stepped forward, introducing himself as Ben Rhea with exaggerated politeness. When he turned to introduce Muron, Vanson chuckled softly. There's no need, I already know her, he said. His gaze lingered on Muron with a trace of nostalgia. It's been a long time. How have you been, child? Muron smiled faintly, saying she'd been fine, more or less. Rogue looked between them, intrigued. Vanson explained that Muron was once the gardener's daughter, tending these same flower beds with her father. Though she had lived close to Harrier, she had still been a servant's child. Rogue's curiosity deepened. He couldn't picture the quiet Muron as anyone subordinate. When he mentioned Harrier's title as the next chief, Vanson laughed heartily, confirming it as truth. Harrier once studied with the Red Lamb tribe, Vanson said, leading them into the great hall lit by flickering torches. He went there to learn the ways of leadership and earn the right to be chief. That land, always at war with imperial knights, was the perfect place to test one's strength. His voice softened. He was so diligent, studied every day, failed again and again in the great hunt, but never gave up. Until one day, something in him broke. 4 years ago, he disappeared, taking Muron with him. The servants left one by one. Only I stayed, waiting for his return. When Rogue asked why, Vanson smiled gently. Someone had to keep the house clean for Harrier's homecoming. That's what I promise. He looked toward the courtyard where Muron stood, hands buried in soil, and she believed he'd come back too. Later, Rogue found Muron in the garden, crouched among the flowers. Her hands moved gently over the soil as if tracing old memory. What are you doing here? Rogue asked, tilting his skull. She looked up with a small smile. Just helping out a bit, skull. My family used to be Harrier's gardeners. Her tone turned quiet. He would have been a great chief, you know. But that's not why I left with him. Rogue listened silently as she brushed dirt from her hand. Maybe it's time you heard a story, she said softly, and her voice carried him into the past. Years earlier, her father, Bussine, had stood before Chief Hawker Riemann and his young son, Harrier. The great hall had smelled of pine and smoke, banners fluttering like flames. Bowing deeply, Po Same introduced himself as a gardener seeking refuge. The chief welcomed them warmly, saying the Mother Mountains had guided them there. He promised safety and kinship under the White Lion Tail tribe. To little Muron, all the talk of duty and honor was unbearably dull. Then the chief turned to Harrier. She's your age, he said. Show her around. The boy nodded shyly, approaching Muron with a nervous grin. I'm Harrier, he said. She handed him a fluffy pink ball that looked like candy. He laughed awkwardly. You didn't have to offer tribute. But when he realized it was goat dung, his smile vanished. What is this? He shouted, throwing it away. Muron burst out laughing, introducing herself properly as Muron Same. Harrier's face burned red. You realize I outrank you, he stammered. That sort of behavior could get you punished. Muron tilted her head. Is rank really that important? Is it more valuable than laughing together? Harrier hesitated, unsure how to respond. No, he admitted quietly. Muron grinned, calling him a dummy, and pulled him by the hand toward the fields. Together they teased a lazy pig until its face puffed up like a potato, laughing so loudly that a group of children peeked from the bushes. Muron called them over, and soon the field filled with laughter and chasing feet. For the first time, Harrier felt something he never had before. Someone saw him not as a chief's heir, but simply as Harrier. That single day planted something deep within him, warmth, and the fragile seed of friendship. Years passed, and the bond between the two grew. One evening, they lay together on a quiet meadow under a fading sunset. Harrier spoke first. Do you think I can ever become like my mother? Muron rolled her eyes affectionately. Idiot, she said. You're worried about becoming chief again, aren't you? Harrier nodded. Soon, I'll have to leave for Red Lamb to study. What if I can't do it? Muron smiled at him, her voice steady. You'll do fine. Not just me, the whole tribe believes in you. Her words stayed with him long after she fell asleep beside him. When the time came, Harrier stood before Red Bidan, the towering chief of the Red Lamb tribe. Bidan's crimson cloak rippled like fire as he smiled down at the young white lion. So, this is the future chief, he said. Then I'll make sure you deserve that title. His training began at dawn. Bidan placed a massive boulder on the ground and ordered Harrier to move it alone. If a chief loses his strength, he loses his tribe, Bidan said sternly. Your stamina will become their will to survive. Day after day, Harrier strained against the stone, muscles trembling, blood trickling down his arms. He pushed because he refused to stop. When his body finally gave in, Bidan shifted the training from muscle to mind. They sat over a chessboard. A leader must think, always, Bidan said. One mistake, one wrong move, and your people die. Later, he led Harrier to a vast underground library filled with thousands of ancient tomes. These are the records of our tribes, laws, monsters, history. Master them all. The endless pages devoured Harrier's night. His nose bled, his eyes blurred, but he refused to quit. In his moments of doubt, he saw Muron's smiling face, her faith, her laughter, and it kept him upright. Stay strong, he whispered to himself. For them, months turned into a year. Harrier grew tougher, wiser, sharper. Red Bidan often watched him silently, his respect growing with each test. But one day, the mansion erupted with chaos. Rumors spread through the Red Lamb tribe like wildfire. Harrier Hawker, the White Lion's heir, had vanished. Once upon a time, there was a story that everyone knew, a tale of comrades banding together to slay the Demon King. Adults told it beside hearth fires, and children listened wide-eyed, clutching blankets as their dreams filled with shining swords and heroes unyielding before darkness. Among those children was a boy who believed every word. He saw his mother standing tall with a shield in one hand and a sword in the other, protecting her clan like a radiant knight. Behind her, their people followed without fear, and that image carved itself deep into the boy's heart. From then on, his dream was simple, to be like her. He poured his life into the blade, chasing that shining ideal. But ideals are fragile. When the day came that everything he loved collapsed, only a shattered boy was left among the ruins of his dream. After that incident, Harrier vanished without a word. Snow fell endlessly that night, blanketing the roads in white silence. Muran, refusing to stay behind, packed her bag and stepped into the storm. Baron called out, begging her to stop, but his words were lost in the wind. Muran's breath came out in white puffs, her boots sinking deep into the snow. She didn't hesitate. Instinct guided her steps, the quiet pull of friendship stronger than reason. Even as the cold bit through her coat and her shoulders trembled, she pushed forward. Somewhere ahead, she felt Harrier's sorrow calling out, faint but unmistakable, like the echo of a bond that refused to die. Far to the north, buried in frost, lay the adventurer's village, a place of wandering souls and forgotten dream. In one dimly lit tavern, laughter murmured faintly below as snowflakes drifted past the window. Upstairs, Harrier sat slouched over a wooden table, the faint glow of firelight flickering across his face. His fingers trembled around a cup of cheap liquor, the warmth sliding down his throat like an illusion. He barely looked up when the door creaked open. Muran stood there, her hair dusted with snow, her eyes filled with quiet disbelief. The proud warrior she had once followed was now a man drowned in self-pity. Yet she didn't scorn him. She simply looked at him, long enough for the silence to weigh heavy between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but sharp. Why had he run away? Harrier gave a faint, bitter smile. He said it didn't suit him. The sword, the clan, the burden of being someone's hope. He claimed he lacked talent, that he had no right to lead. Muran's jaw tightened. She stepped closer, grabbed his collar, and pulled him up until their eyes met. Her anger wasn't cruel, it came from heartbreak. She wanted him to remember what he once fought for, the boy who had looked up to his mother's light. But Harrier's hollow gaze didn't change. He muttered words from his old master. The first time is experience. The second, a mistake. The third, stubbornness. The fourth, knowing your limits. He had failed the great hunt 4 times. Each failure carved deeper into him until he no longer saw a future. Whether in close combat or ranged, he fell short. Even his instincts, once praised, now mocked him with how little they mattered. His master's verdict echoed in his skull. You are not fit to be a warrior. He believed it. To him, Muran could never understand how it felt to live under the crushing weight of expectations when you had nothing special of your own. He fell, stood, and fell again until exhaustion became his only companion. Muran listened, her anger softening. She saw not a coward but a man suffocating under dreams too heavy to carry. Maybe that was why he fled, because peace, even in disgrace, was easier than another failure. Still, she refused to accept that this was how his story would end. Is this really what you want? She asked quietly. Harrier didn't answer. He pressed his hand to his head, as if trying to remember the boy he once was, but the image was gone. His voice came out hoarse, the kind born from too much silence. Muran stayed beside him, not speaking again. Dawn slowly crept through the window, painting them in pale gold. Between them, words were no longer needed. The stillness itself was a fragile promise, that one day, he might rise again. 2 years passed. Seasons changed, snow melted and returned, and Harrier walked on. He still carried his shield, the same one that bore his clan's mark. Beside him, Muran walked as his companion, her presence steady and quiet. They had become adventurers together, wandering from town to town. She never left him, believing time would slowly heal him where words could not. Though Harrier rarely spoke of his tribe anymore, he never abandoned that shield. It was more than a weapon. It was the proof that somewhere within him, the fire still smoldered. Perhaps one day, it would burn again. In the present, Muran chuckled softly to herself. When she traveled with Skull, she saw a reflection of Harrier's younger self, reckless, sharp, and unbreakable. The similarity struck her like déjà vu. One evening, she told Skull her thoughts, suggesting he take both of them as disciples. She believed Harrier had talent. He had only been guided wrong. Skull listened silently before nodding once. He understood. What Harrier needed wasn't mercy, it was someone strong enough to break open the walls around his heart. And so it began. Skull stormed into Harrier's room without warning, grabbed him by the collar, and glared into his eye. Harrier blinked, startled. Then Skull grinned, a mischievous spark in his gaze. With a sudden headbutt, he knocked Harrier backward. I'm not joking, he said simply. I'll train you, properly this time. Harrier stood frozen, too stunned to reply. Mura laughed, loud, genuine, the kind of laugh that could melt old wounds. Her laughter filled the room like sunlight, and even Skull looked briefly confused before chuckling himself. For a moment, the past loosened its grip. Outside, the storm had cleared. The morning sky was vast and blue, the kind that follows long winters. Down the quiet road, a man with a prosthetic leg walked through the empty village. His breath came ragged, his coat torn, his body scarred. He called out the names of his comrades, but no one answered. Only silence replied. He stopped, staring at his trembling hands, and whispered that he couldn't return to Valhalla, not like that. He was the last survivor. The others were gone. They all got taken by those bastards wolves. The damn wolves of the Empire are coming. The air in the chieftain's hut was thick enough to choke on, the smoke from the central fire pit curling into the heated arguments that filled the confined space. Warriors of the Red Lamb tribe sat in a rough circle, their tempers barely restrained. "Where did Harrier go?" one of them demanded, his grip tightening around the haft of his axe, the tension in his voice like the prelude to a storm. Skull, sitting a little apart from the rest, his hood casting long shadows over his sharp features, didn't even glance up. "I'm teaching him a couple of things," he said, his tone casual, almost dismissive. "He's a little busy. Let's just proceed among ourselves." A second warrior snorted and spat on the dirt floor. "Teaching him? That guy? How absurd. He's a failure, a weak child who ran away during training." The air froze. The crackle of the fire seemed to stop. Skull's head tilted slightly, his movements deliberate and slow. From under his hood, his gaze locked onto the insolent man. "Nah," he said softly, the calm in his voice more dangerous than a roar. "You don't have a good eye for people." He leaned forward until the warrior could feel the cold shadow of his presence. "You couldn't even recognize his incredible potential. Do you even use those eyes of yours?" The insult burned hotter than the fire. The warrior's face twisted in rage, blood rising to his skin. "You damn Skull." Before he could finish, the hide flap burst open. A tribesman stumbled in, panting. "Chief, the tribe is quite noisy." Outside, the noise wasn't just commotion, it was panic barely held back by discipline. The chief stood tall at the village gates, his massive frame a wall of authority against the chaos. "TSK. I agree." His voice rolled like thunder through the crowd. "Gatekeeper. Who is that?" From the watchtower came a shout. "A survivor from the coastal defense has been found. Bring them in." Moments later, two men half carried a wounded warrior forward. His armor was caked with dried blood, one leg dragging uselessly. He collapsed before the chief, his voice raw and ragged. "Chief, please, give us the order to attack." His desperation cut through the air. "If we can't cut the throats of those Empire bastards now, I won't be able to face the comrades who left for Valhalla." The chief's expression did not waver. His voice was steady, implacable. "I refuse." The crowd gasped. The wounded warrior's breath hitched, his disbelief mirrored in the faces around him. "If we attack the Empire first," the chief continued, "it will mean all-out war. The losses will be enormous. And you," his gaze fell on the man kneeling before him, "how have you been fighting with that body? It's best to avoid meaningless death. Return to your post. Fulfill your duties." The order was final. "God damn it, Chief," the man roared, tears cutting paths through the grime on his face. "Aren't you even angry about this? We're going to die at the coast." A cry from the gates cut through his words. "The Empire's wolves. They're coming. Chief." The gatekeeper's shout was breathless, terrified. There was an ambush by the Empire's army along the coast. The scale was enormous, we couldn't even counterattack. It was a massacre. Countless defenders wiped out. "We're about to be surrounded." The tribe fell silent. Only the wind howled. Flashback, the coastal massacre. The world was nothing but snow, blood, and screams. A commander lay pinned beneath the corpse of a war beast, his leg crushed beyond saving. He clawed at the frozen ground, eyes fixed on the dying horizon. "Ah, not yet, our warriors are still there," he muttered, voice trembling. "Commander, your leg, it's crushed. You can't fight anymore," his subordinate pleaded, tears freezing on his cheeks. "So what about my leg?" the commander snarled. "My comrades are still left there. See, Commander." Thwack. A massive sword tore through the subordinate's skull, splitting it cleanly. The commander didn't even blink. "That's right," he whispered, his voice hollow. "They're all still there." Back in the present, Skull had stepped outside, listening silently. His voice was low, meant for no one but himself. Stuck in that time. Graves filled with hollow coffins. For on the battlefield, even the act of burying the dead is a luxury. O warriors of the north, weep for your brothers left to decay upon the forsaken fields of war. On the tribe's training grounds, the snow was red with bruised sweat and blood. Harrier, the chieftain's son, lay sprawled on the icy earth, gasping. His body was covered in marks of exhaustion and pain. Leader, please, have mercy, he groaned. The trainer looked at Skull for direction. Skull stood with his arms folded, his voice flat. 10 more rounds. Ag. Harrier's scream echoed through the trees. Skull's thoughts were calm, detached. You can't teach what you've never lived through. Pain is the only language a warrior truly understands. He watched as Harrier struggled to rise, his limbs trembling. He lacks the will, the spirit of a warrior. He's chained by the shadow of being the chief's son. But if he survives this, he'll awaken. The trainer raised his arm again. On your feet. 10 more. Snow mixed with blood beneath Harrier's palms as he forced himself upright. Skull's eyes narrowed. This is the start. If he stands again, then one day, he'll become the warrior he was meant to be. 7 days later. The northern mountains loomed, a white, frozen abyss. At their base, Imperial soldiers huddled together, awkward in their shining armor. Hey, don't eat the snow. It's dirty, one shouted. The other grinned, snowflakes melting on his tongue. Tastes good. You should try it. Their chatter ended when a tall figure approached, the notorious Knight of Whack, former commander of the Imperial Northern Garrison. His expression was one of perpetual disdain. Still surrounding yourself with idiots, I see, he muttered, then louder, Escher Soma stupid they may look like fools but each one's worth 100 men. Strawberry Bingsu, one soldier exclaimed. If you sprinkle blood on the snow, it's strawberry Bingsu. Holy shit, Knight, your IQ must be 120, the other replied, laughing. Knight ignored them, eyes locking on the armored commander beside him. So, Commander, why are you here? You after the 4th Knight title? Humph, I'm here to deal with that necromancer bastard, the commander growled. Knight's smirk was razor thin. Then why are you sitting here instead of marching into the mountains? Why should I tell you? Knight's smile faded. Because you'll amuse me eventually, he said, voice dripping with contempt. Pathetic. The commander's temper snapped. He drew his sword, shouting to his troops. Prepare for the enemy's attack. 4th platoon, reconnaissance formation. Move into the mountains. As his men scrambled, the commander's hand brushed the cold steel of his faceplate. His whisper was venom. Wait for me, necromancer. I'll make you pay for the face you tore from me. Back at the tribe, war drums thundered. Red Lamb, the scout, burst into the square. Imperial forces have invaded the mountains, he reported, voice hoarse with urgency. This isn't a raid, they're coming in full force from the coast. That ambush was only the start. His fist tightened. Like it or not, this is war. The chief strode forward in full armor, his presence enough to silence the entire tribe. His voice was calm, terrifying in its steadiness. Red Lamb, clear the way. I'm going in. From a distance Skull watched the preparations. He inhaled, the air stinging his lungs. The stench of blood, unbearable. His expression hardened. So it begins again. But this time it's different. I won't run from my duty anymore. Near the medic tent, the coastal defender was dragging himself upright, his mangled legs leaving trails in the snow. Out of my way. I'm going too. If I just sit here and watch, I might as well already be dead. Skull approached, his gaze steady. Crushed legs, you must be the coastal defender I saw before. Calm yourself. The man glared. Skull. Are you trying to stop me too? No, Skull replied quietly. No one should stop a warrior's choice. But tell me something. He leaned down. Do you fight for revenge? The defender stiffened. What are you saying? No. We are the shields of the Red Lamb. I'm ashamed for failing to protect them. That's why I fight. To complete my mission. Skull studied him, impressed. Even after all that, your honor still burns. His tone deepened. Then answer me this. What if the dead were called back? Would they fight again? The warrior froze, horror flashing across his face. That's forbidden. Raising the dead is sorcery. But they were shields of the Red Lamb. If what they protected is threatened again. Skull's eyes gleamed beneath his hood. Exactly. If ever there's a reason to disturb the peace of the dead, it's when their duty calls once more. The defender fell silent, then nodded, his voice low. Is that so? Then lend me their flag, Skull said. The warrior handed it to him, trembling. Take it. Skull raised the torn, blood-stained banner high. I offer my boundless admiration for your dedication. A light burst forth, cold, white, ancient. It swept across the field like a divine wind. The villagers cried out, shielding their eyes. What is this light? As it faded, figures began to rise, from shallow graves, from where they'd fallen long ago. Skull lowered the flag, his voice carrying through the silence. Raise your heads, northern warriors. The dead obeyed, standing tall, their armor glinting faintly in the spectral glow. The heroes have returned from the realm of the dead, he said softly, pride and sorrow mingling in his tone. And beneath that ghostly light, the tribe of the Red Lambs prepared to march once more, living and dead united by one unbreakable will. The sky shook with the rising purple flag as the defense forces' call thundered across the cold land, echoing against steel and bone. The undead army marched ahead, the skeleton soldiers moving in a steady northern formation, their glowing yellow eyes bright as torches in a storm. The human coastal defense force stood before them, blades tight in shaking hands as the first clash erupted, one skeleton soldier slashing down a defender's helmet with such force it split clean in two. The soldier dropped, lifeless, while the skeleton kept marching, unshaken. Voices roared through the air, chanting of duty, honor, and a mission that must finish before the night died. A blonde soldier trembled, cried, then raised his sword high as if offering his spirit to the flag. When enemies on horseback thundered toward them, the undead lifted their shield, creating a wall pierced by narrow gaps. From those gaps, purple magic spears burst out, breaking through hithe charred. The proud, indomitable shields held the line, and the battlefield shook under their relentless will. High above, watching the tide of battle shift and shake, the skeleton whispered a plea to the great spirits of the Mother Mountain. The snow around the skeleton carried the words across the wind as the skeleton begged forgiveness for summoning the departed and asked for the strength to guide the coastal defense force's final mission. Then the skeleton turned toward Harrier and Muron, both standing in the snowstorm like two young sparks caught in a world too cold. The skeleton told them the battlefield was still too early for them, but sometimes early steps lead to deeper learning. Snow swirled around the mountain ridge. Where they stood, the land beneath glowing from the purple light of magic and war. Thanks to the defense force's return, the skeleton said, the battlefield was now balanced, the perfect ground for enlightenment. The skeleton faced Harrier, announcing that the time had come. The answer Harrier should have given during the Great Hunt, a test that mimicked war, must now be proven here on a real battlefield. The words hit Harrier harder than the cold wind. A real battlefield, a place where chaos breathes, where death sweeps by like a blade of ice, where human lives vanish as fast as a gust of winter air. Harrier trembled, a drop of sweat sliding down despite the cold. When the skeleton asked again if Harrier could prove herself, Harrier tried to answer, voice cracking, unsure. But the skeleton struck Harrier's forehead with a flick of a finger, clearing her thought, then bumped a fist against her chest. War required responsibility, curses, and the strength to face tragedy and sin. The skeleton would carry out that role. Harrier simply had to carry out hers. When Harrier asked where the skeleton was going, the answer came calm and sharp, to settle things with that monster. Far across the field, Fry, the monster the skeleton spoke of, stood laughing with a wild, burning joy. The red-haired warrior blushed as she gripped her sword behind her back, staring at the rising undead army. To her, it was thrilling, almost beautiful. She shouted into the storm, delighted that the undead had finally been unleashed. Meanwhile, the skeleton leapt from the ridge and shot into the sky like a purple comet. Harrier and Muron watched the skeleton vanish upward, the voice echoing behind, now, the time has come. Go, Harrier, into life and death. You can do it. A burst of purple light erupted above Fry, and the skeleton came crashing down, blades ready. Fry braced herself, tightening her grip with a gleaming smile. The skeleton struck first, the clash of their blades sending a shockwave through the frozen earth. Pressure rippled through the air, powerful enough to distort the snow. Meanwhile Harrier pulled on her mask, whispering inwardly, realize yourself, warrior of the north. Down below, the defense force squads moved quickly. Mages raised their staffs high, forming glowing circles while shield soldiers stepped forward. Magic fired into the battlefield, lighting up the snow. Harrier sprinted in front of them, drawing her sword and weaving through attacks with acrobatic precision. A jump, a twist, another jump, landing behind the mages. The squid captain stared in disbelief at Harrier's leaping strength. Harrier's next strike cut through the captain's armor, spilling blood before Harrier landed and steadied herself in the snow. Muran watched, stunned. Harrier's movements were unlike anything she had seen, no shield, no hesitation, only smooth joints and explosive, wild elasticity. Harrier had always been a warrior with a shield and short sword, but this was entirely different. Fry clashed with the skeleton again, shouting for focus, forcing the skeleton back step by step. The skeleton thought of Harrier's real ability, close quarters brawling against many, mixed with feints and hidden weapons. Harrier then launched a dagger through the battlefield, striking an enemy soldier through the eye gap. Landing above the body, Harrier breathed in sharply as the skeleton realized the truth. Harrier was the same type as the skeleton, a rogue warrior hybrid, built for chaos. Fear had no place on this battlefield. Harrier whispered, "A northern warrior," just as Fry roared again, demanding attention. Then Fry slammed a foot into the ground, cracking it open. Fry lunged at the skeleton with mockery on her lips, calling the skeleton a fake teacher on a battlefield and threatening death. Her punches rained down in rapid succession. The skeleton blocked each one with bone and instinct until one punch slipped through, smashing against the skull. Fry grabbed the skeleton's chest piece and slammed the skeleton into the earth with brutal force. Snow exploded outward from the impact. Harrier saw it and roared for the skeleton, fury rising inside. She cut down enemies in a sweeping rush, then lunged forward with the speed of a winter storm. A soldier almost struck Harrier from the side, but Muran intercepted, killing the attacker and yelling not to drop her guard. Harrier replied with a breath of relief. Then another figure appeared, grinning, lips torn and stitched, a blade in hand. He laughed about Fry stealing his prey but seemed eager for the chaos. Muran noticed his movements, commenting how similar he looked to the skeleton. The stitched man tensed his grip, claiming Fry could never beat the skeleton and that the real prey belonged to him. With eyes glowing in anger, he rushed toward Harrier and Muran, calling them northern rookies. All three clashed, snow blasting around them. His Dome-style swordplay sent shockwave, forcing them back. Muran laughed nervously, noting how drastically his personality seemed to shift. Harrier shouted that they needed to adapt, to fight together. A strange feeling grew inside her, nerves sharp from head to toe, fear melting away, leaving only raw awareness. She could feel only herself, free and alive. The stitched man growled, annoyed by their evasive steps, calling Harrier a rat that brought up disgusting memories of the skeleton. He unleashed another Dome-style technique, the ground shaking from the blast. Harrier dodged through instinct and calculation, one technique per breath. That meant this was her chance. She shouted for Muran. Muran understood instantly and struck Harrier's back, launching her forward like a speeding arrow. The man turned, recognizing the northern technique. He smiled, devilish and sharp. Harrier felt his eyes widen on her, and she realized something. The breathing wasn't finished yet. Fear flickered through her chest an instant before the next technique came. The man released his wolf hunt howling, force that crashed directly into Harrier. Her vision shattered. Memories flashed, playing with Muran, laughing in the snow, chasing stories of northern warriors, dreaming of strength. Everything blurred, drifting in and out. She remembered loving stories since childhood but not knowing why. Maybe it was because of her mother. Then a drop hit Harrier's mask, warm, red. It was Muran's blood. Muran had thrown herself forward, arms wrapping around Harrier, taking the blow meant for. Wounds tore across Muran's back, deep and many. Harrier froze as Muran whispered in her fading mind, "Don't go ahead of me, you bastard."